Welcome everyone to the Newark Public Library's Martin Luther King Jr. Commemorative Lecture. We are grateful to the PNC Foundation for its ongoing support of our library's Black History Celebration exhibition and public programs such as tonight's discussion on Black Cinema Since MLK, Where Are We Now? The Newark Public Library has a long history of providing our community with thoughtful, important programs around Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. Previous speakers have included former Schomburg director Howard Dotson, Leisha Brooks from the Southern Poverty Law Center, and the Avery Sharp Quintet, a jazz ensemble that presented a history of the civil rights movement in a multimedia format. This year, we are eager to hear our panel's take on Black films over the past 5 decades. After all, films are accessible, even more so today with streaming, and capture the humor, tragedy, deep inequities, and everyday events that make up people's lives. Now, I am honored to introduce Enrico Della Corna, Regional President for PNC Bank, and welcome him to New Jersey. Enrico assumed his new role on January 4th. Previously, he served as PNC's Regional Executive for Commercial Banking in the Northeast and has brought 2 decades of PNC commercial banking management and leadership experience to the New Jersey team. This new position serves as a homecoming to the greater New York, New Jersey region. A Brooklyn native, Enrico's early professional career included a variety of sales positions in and around New York prior to joining PNC's management training program in 1989. Enrico is a graduate of Pennsylvania State University, where he earned his BS in Business Administration with a major in marketing. He also earned a master's degree in international management with honors from Thunderbird, the American Graduate School of International Management. We're looking forward to building a strong relationship with you, Enrico, and the great community-minded PNC, which, may I add, is my personal bank and a favorite of mine too. Thanks so much for being with us this evening. Enrico, turning it over to you.
Good evening, and thank you for that introduction, Jocelyn, and thanks for being a client. I'm excited to be here as I step into the role as PNC's New Jersey Regional President, and I know you are probably familiar with my colleague, and Linda Bowden. And this is one of New Jersey's team's favorite events, and we love attending every year. Before continuing any further, I'd like to extend a note of congratulations to the library team for organizing a terrific series of Black History Month events. This is PNC's 14th year sponsoring the Newark Public Library's Black History Month celebration. And we have a long-standing and passionate commitment to the library and to the people of Newark. We love Brick City and its diverse communities. And we love to come together with the community more than any other time, given the calls for greater focus on social justice and equality during the past year. Our ability to come together, no matter the format, is critical. In that light, the guiding theme of this year's Black History Month celebration and its focus on the role of pop culture in sharing the African-American community's more than 100 years of activism for liberation could not be more timely or more important. So you may wonder why a bank is so invested in the library, the city of Newark, and Black History Month. PNC is a company that is committed to embracing diversity and inclusion. We have the privilege of working with residents and business owners across our state. Along with that is a welcome opportunity to work with our friends and neighbors in diverse range of communities and neighborhoods, and when the opportunity allows, to celebrate you. That, most importantly, is why we are here, to celebrate the beauty and the vitality of African-American culture during Black History Month. Thank you for having me. And on behalf of PNC and my colleagues in New Jersey, we wish everyone good health and send you again a sincere thanks for the opportunity to join and celebrate the kickoff of the library's Black History Month celebration. Thank you, Jocelyn.
Thank you so much, Enrico. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Lauren Wells, who serves as president of our library board of trustees and moderator for this discussion. Lauren is an educator, researcher, and community organizer who focuses on educational equity and school transformation to support and elevate Black and Brown students and their communities. As director of the Metropolitan Center for Urban Education at NYU, she led an initiative called the Newark Global Village School Zone. She also has served as Chief Education Officer for Mayor Ras Baraka. In 2016, Lauren founded Creed Strategies, a group of consultants who use their knowledge, experiences, and resources in collaboration with educators and communities to enhance learning conditions for children and teachers. She holds a BA in English from Temple University, an MA in Educational Leadership from Teachers College, Columbia University, and a PhD in Education Policy from the University of California, Los Angeles. Lauren, the Zoom is now yours.
Thank you, Jocelyn.
Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure as the board president to welcome all to this evening's Dr. Martin Luther King commemorative lecture. I am thrilled to be having this conversation after such a historic day yesterday. I think that there are many milestones in the day that lend themselves to a discussion of Black film, of Black representation, of Black narratives, of Black culture and Black creativity. And I think that it is an opportunity to think about both where we have been and where we have left to go. As I start this conversation, I'm struck by two quotes that I think apply to this evening, one from Dr. King and one from James Baldwin. The first quote is, "Every man of humane convictions must decide on the protest that best suits his convictions, but we must all protest." And in reflecting on the cinematograph capturing of James Baldwin's last narrative, where he was beginning to write about Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King, and Malcolm X, he speaks in the film about bearing witness and what that meant for him as a writer. And I think that in many ways, film and cinematography do the same things. And so he says that bearing witness means to move as largely and as freely as possible to write the story and to get it out. And so as we go into this evening's discussion with the swearing in of our first Black Vice President, female woman Vice President, Kamala Harris. And as we move out of an era that I think has been very beyond complicated and complex and trying and really pulling at many of the things that we have captured over time in Black film, the tensions, the realities, the narratives, the struggles, the challenges to our humanity and our dignity, I am pleased to be able to introduce two individuals who I think in their own right, in their work, have done tremendous jobs of both telling stories, capturing history, defining who we are, and I think pushing us to challenge what the possibilities of ourselves in the society that we are in are. And so without further ado, I introduce to you this evening, Richard Wesley. Richard Wesley is born in Newark, so he is a native Newarker. He graduated from Howard University and studied playwriting under the tutelage of Owen Dotson and Ted Shine. He was presented with a Drama Desk Award for his 1971 stage play, The Black Terror. Mr. Wesley has two NAACP Image Best Picture Awards for the motion pictures Uptown Saturday Night and Let's Do It Again. He is an associate professor in the Tisch School of the Arts at New York University. He currently sits on the National Film Preservation Board of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., and the selection committee for the Black Film Festival of the Newark Museum of Art. The Newark Black Film Festival is the longest running film festival of its kind, and he is married to the novelist Valerie Wilson Wesley. I also am pleased to introduce this evening Cheo Hodari Coker. Seattle-based, Cheo is the creator and former showrunner and executive producer of Marvel's Luke Cage, the critically acclaimed drama, which ran for 2 seasons from 2016 to 2018 and is now popularly known as the show that broke Netflix. It probably did that again during the last 9 months that we've all been inside. A 1994 graduate of Stanford University, Coker started his career in journalism as a staff writer for the Los Angeles Times pop music section. Coker co-wrote the 2009 Fox Searchlight's Notorious Big biopic, entitled Notorious, and segued into television writing for Southland, where he eventually rose to supervising producer and won a 2013 NAACP award for the season 4 episode of God's Work. Coker was named number 42 on the Root 100 Most Influential African Americans in 2018. And so as we start this evening, I just would like to bring you gentlemen into the conversation. I think leaving off where we were sort of talking backstage, if that is a thing on Zoom, in the offline world, and really thinking about what is Black film? How do you define it? How have you seen the definitions of Black film changing over the course of the last 50 or 60 years in the time frame since we have come into our own rights in terms of creating films, scripts, narratives, having them produced, staging, all of the things that come into play when you're actually putting together a film. There's a lot of discourse out there and, you know, differences of opinion. Some say that if it's a film that centers Black characters and isn't written by Black people, it's a Black film. And then there are others who say that a Black film is a Black film and it's a Black film all the way down to the dollars, to the people that are on the camera. So I will start and ask Mr. Wesley to jump in on that question first.
Well, I would say, from my own point of view, a Black film is a motion picture entity that is designed to inform Black people who they are, where they are, and what condition they are in. This artistic effort can be developed by a person who is of African descent, or it can be developed by someone who is not. The primary objective here is, or the primary definer for me would be the intent of the film. And if the intent of the film is to inform African-American people or African people throughout the diaspora, who we are, where we are, and what condition we are in, then we're talking about a Black film.
Cheo, what would you add to that?
I can't really add too much to it. Well, you know, the one thing that the bios left out is that Rich is my uncle. And so I've literally, everything I know about screenwriting, I learned, you know, from him. And at the same time, also watching him, and I've watched him answer that question every 10 or 15 years, various panels. And honestly, the thing is that I don't feel bad about struggling about that question, because that question has been asked since 1965, 67, 68. And even when I read older articles where Rich in the 70s, they asked him the same question. It's always the same thing. And so I'll answer it the same way, which is that, yes, Black film can be defined as any film that, you know, talks about the conditions, mindset, culture, whereabouts, and destination of Black people. But now, as our consciousness expands, there are now debates, because there are films directed by Black people that have nothing to do with Black culture. So, for example, would the sequel of the second Fantastic Four movie that Tim Story directed, even though Tim Story is an African American director, I think Tim also directed the first Fantastic Four movie. Would that be considered a Black film? With The Color Purple, yes, Steven Spielberg directed it, but the screenwriter also was not African American. So I remember, you know, even when I was a kid, people asking, okay, is The Color Purple a Black film? Black people love the movie. We constantly refer back to it, but, you know, is somebody Black being in the movie enough to make it a Black film? You know, like, I mean, there are a lot of different questions. I think, you know, about what constitutes Black film. I mean, can something in its approach, like have no Black people involved, but for example, the way that it kind of expresses its aesthetic, like City of God, perfect example. There are no, I mean, yes, there are Black people involved in the movie, but when it comes to the actual direction and writing of that film, they are white Brazilians. But is that a Black film? I would consider City of God a Black film, but that's the thing. It's hard to define, I think.
How have you sort of seen the contours of this debate about what constitutes Black film playing out, I would say over time, but also since you represent different generations in terms of the art, in terms both over time and within your individual specific space within cinematography? How have you seen the struggle with this definition play out? Are there examples of films that you've worked on where you have personally experienced these tensions in your work, either leading the project or being a part of the project?
Well, during the 80s, I think if you're working in the commercial arena, and in this case specifically Hollywood, then that question is always going to be incredibly prominent, because no one who works in Hollywood as an artist has complete control over the project that they're working on. You're either hired to produce the film, or a studio has commissioned you or commissioned your work because they like it. And once they get you onto the lot and have you under contract, they're constantly going to be looking over your shoulder because you're spending their money to make a film for them that they are then going to distribute for the purpose of making money for themselves. So they're going to step in and ask you questions. Well, what does this line mean? Do we have to cast this particular actor? Do you really want that ending? All these questions about your artistic vision begin to fall under their purview, because at the end of the day, though they never really remind you of this directly, Cheo may have a different take on this, because he's been in circles that I haven't gone in, which is one of the things I'm most proud of in terms of him. But generally speaking, that area of control, becomes a major bone of contention between the people who are on the floor making the actual picture and the people who are sitting in the executive offices acting as the gatekeepers, deciding what is going to pass through that gate and what is not.
And I think the thing is that I think what Rich is saying is 100% true. We have the perspective of being screenwriters. And so as a screenwriter, you automatically don't have your level of power is both infinite and very limited. It's infinite because no one can start work until the screenplay comes in. So as Robert Town always said, the screenwriter is always looked at as the a-holes preventing everyone else from getting to work. But then once that screenplay comes in, and once all the department heads are hired, once a director is making decisions, that director has a certain amount of say. But how many different articles have you read about directors complaining about not having control of their cut, or certain things that were made at the studio's behest? And particularly when we talk African American directors, there's a whole slew of them that make the same complaints about things. From a showrunning standpoint within television, it's different because as a showrunner, you have the ultimate, from a writing perspective, control, because it's the only time as a writer you hire the directors and that you have pretty much final say. But no say is really final, because ultimately you're gonna answer to somebody. And so there's always a push and pull. For example, with Luke Cage, I was lucky that I had a show where, for me, diving deep into African American culture was just as important as any superpowers that were displayed in the show. But then at the same time, you have these arguments about, okay, do you really need a 16-piece orchestra? And in my case, myself, Adrian Young, and Ali Shea Muhammad believe that yes, we do. We didn't want to just do a regular score. We wanted something special. And then at the same time, it's like, okay, you know, do you really need Rakim? Do you really need KRS-One and you know, in your season 2? Or, you know, the argument comes, you know, would you be better served by having a more contemporary hip hop artist? You know, or you get questions about casting, and you still fight the same battles that you would as a screenwriter. It's just that as a showrunner, you have a little more say, and then you just have to, if you're a screenwriter, hopefully you have some kind of relationship either with the producer or the director where they ultimately will come to you and ask you your opinion. As a showrunner, you still have to be able to, in a very, you know, as civil a way as possible, make sure that your viewpoint is communicated. So sometimes they'll listen, sometimes they won't. I find more often now, we have, because of social media, you now have Black showrunners that are having the opportunity to have more control because they have you know, an audience that is constantly, this is the power of Black Twitter, constantly checking and constantly empowering people when they like what they're seeing and saying, we're going to give you the creative benefit of the doubt because you can point to people that are saying like, yes, this is what we like. Yes, this is absolutely important, you know? And so that's kind of the not the gift and the curse of social media, but social media in many ways empowers creators and you know, in ways that writing letters back in the day never could do, because it's immediate and it's right in your face, and also because it translates directly into buzz and into dollars. I think that's what makes, you know, that's what gives the you know, Shonda Rhimes and DuVernays and Issa Rae's of the world even more power, not just their brilliance, but also the fact that they have an audience that they maintain and that backs their, you know, what they're doing. And so they can say, you know, like, even if you think about a perfect example, it's like you get into a moment like how to get away with murder, that famous scene where when Viola Davis basically takes off you know, her wig, and so you see, you know, her roots and her natural hair. And that's the kind of thing that white executives would be like, do we really need to see that? Is that really important? You know, can we cut away from that because we don't really understand what that moment is? But Black women around the world were like, that's such an important moment, and that's speaking to my struggle and all these other things. And then they're empowered by how Black Twitter, you know, immediately is saying how important and how, you know, integral a moment that is.
The magic word. I was just going to say, Cheo, the magic word there is immediate.
Yeah.
And that's the big difference between, you know, what's happening on the ground now and what was happening, you know, back in my time, because we didn't have Twitter back then.
Right.
And, you know, it could be a month before a letter that someone wrote actually reaches the desk of someone who matters at the studio. And in that month's time, the studio head could have already made the decision to end production. Everyone is scattered. Everything has gone. But with Twitter, what is so wonderful about Twitter is, you see, because it's electronic and because it appears on a screen, it's not only seen by the person who is writing to the other person who's going to receive. It's seen by as many followers as that letter writer has. And so the gatekeeper, seeing that Twitter addressed to him, can also see how many other people are reading it at that moment. And he can extrapolate numbers from there. And that, and so Cheo is absolutely right. The level of power.
Let me ask you this. Just thinking about the definition intent that you both have kind of agreed around, right? Like it's the intent of the film to convey who Black people are, what the conditions are, where our stories, and then this idea of control of the narrative, control of the process. How would you describe the arc of Black film, giving these two sort of factors since MLK, right? Since that's the frame of our discussion tonight. And I think we might start in 1967 as we were talking backstage, and kind of think about sort of a progression of what that looks like to both of you from your vantage points, and maybe talk about some specific films that you think really sort of stand out in terms of markers of both meeting the intent and really beginning to assert control of the narrative, of the development of the film, of the content of the film, of the small details of the film. And Cheo, you want to jump in first on this one?
Sure. Yeah. No pressure. The thing is that when you look at 68, Martin Luther King, what was it, April 4th or April 5th?
Yes.
April 4th, 1968 was when he was assassinated. That happens. And at that time, James Brown, as a musician, was arguably probably the strongest cultural force in Black music, and then at the same time as an entrepreneur, just in terms of owning his own labels, owning himself, and owning James Brown Productions and everything else. And so you see this shift. There was already kind of the shift within the music of Say It Loud, Black and I'm Proud, and Black Power. That was happening musically. It wasn't happening cinematically yet. You didn't really see that kind of expression of unadulterated Black culture. Of course, I think Nothing But a Man had come out by that point, but
1965, 66 was Nothing But a Man.
But it didn't necessarily have that kind of creative push. But then, it wasn't really around the time until Mario Van Peebles does, Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song, were you seeing a representation in film that would match, the street plays that my uncle, this is a chance for me to plug your book. But he has an incredible book about the history of Black theater, and how it went from basically what was being taught, at Howard, to then putting up plays in the language and of the times of the people. And then, but that still wasn't being reflected in terms of film. But then Sweet Sweetback was the first film completely independently financed. That was like, it was in a way.
I have to tell you, I actually wrote my senior thesis on Sweetback. I have no idea what I wrote in that paper 20 years ago, but I was an English major and a film minor. So
But the importance of that movie is that way before gangster rap, you had a movie that was basically made from scraps that said, this is the Black experience, and this is not for anybody's consumption other than us. And if you don't like this movie, I don't know if I'm like, I guess fuck y'all. Like, this is us, and this is what we want. And what happened is that movie, being made for almost no money, all of a sudden starts making money. And then, at around that time, this is kind of the beginning of quote unquote Blaxploitation. Blaxploitation, what it became and where it started are two different things. It started off as like, telling empowering Black stories. So once there's a market and there's money in it, if you want to look at that movie, if you want to look at Dolomite, these things begin to happen. Shaft is a studio representation, in terms of Gordon Parks Sr., making that movie. It opens up a realm of all of a sudden the major studios now wanting to make Black movies, and now making stars of, the Pam Griers of the world, of Richard Roundtree, and other people that the Black community has always loved, but had never been seen on the mainstream level. So these things happen. The movies are popular. They always have soundtracks. you kind of see this kind of meld of culture happening cinematically, and then music driven movies at the same time blowing up, at the same time that disco is happening. Eventually by the end of the 70s, all these actors are not going to be mainstream stars. They should have been, but that bigger push into the mainstream didn't necessarily happen. And so then for a while, even though I would say that in the early 80s, you began to see more Black people in television, you didn't necessarily see that push in film, particularly from a Black perspective, until, the rise of Spike Lee, the Hudlins, and a few other people. And so then the same questions happen, the same articles happen. What does this mean in Black cinema? Is this finally the time? And then you have a period between like the 90s and 80s and 90s where now, okay, it's Spike, it's my friend, the late John Singleton, it's Reginald Hudlin, it's the Hughes brothers. You're not seeing as many female voices because Stacey, I'm sorry, Julie Dash, and there are other
Darnell Martin.
Yeah, Darnell Martin. Other filmmakers are trying to break through and are making excellent movies, but don't necessarily have the box office or the push behind them, and so it just becomes this thing where it's like it kind of disappears and it wanes, or you're only seeing 3 or 4 voices. And it's really, I think, in the last 10 years, this push with streaming and television, where you're getting more voices and more opportunities to with series, and that's now also melding into opportunities for, Black filmmakers, male and female, to make a mark. Where now you're at a place where you're seeing just as many Black female directors making huge pushes as you are seeing Black male directors. You're seeing stars from around the world, Black stars from around the world, kind of showing up in each other's productions. I think it's a completely different playing field now than it was before. But it always goes through cycles, and so I think now we're in the middle of this kind of, for lack of a better phrase, a renaissance. And then the question that's being asked now is, okay, when is this going to go away? And I think people are now more savvy about how to maintain it, meaning knowing that ownership is important. I think all the things that Ava DuVernay is doing is incredibly important, not just in terms of the films that she's making individually, but also the fact that Array, her company, in terms of financing movies and making sure that independent voices have the opportunity to get distribution and be heard. Even this thing that she announced with podcasts. I mean, between that and between what Shonda Rhimes is doing with Shonda Vision, you just see a lot of things making sure that there's always going to be some kind of financial or producerial base, rather than just making a film or just jumping from film to film that you're hired for by studios. I think it's becoming a lot more entrepreneurial. And it's really kind of, if you want to go all the way back to Oscar Micheaux, it's kind of the dream of having control of every single aspect of the process, from the beginning, but now doing it, from a mainstream standpoint, and now being able to prove the fact that there are audiences for these things, so that there's more money being put in, and people understanding, particularly, with all, in light of all the social things that have happened that have been acknowledged, in the last year, the importance of it.
And I think international audiences, right? There's this idea that nobody wants to hear our stories as our stories are in the realness of them, or to see them, and that, the diverse casts won't sell, that people won't come. But we know that internationally, that the films that are doing the best out there are the films that represent what the world really looks like, and not sort of a vanilla whitewashed version of what the world looks like. So there are a couple of questions in the Q&A, and I'm going to throw them in now because they're very relevant to what we are talking about. And I think the first one is very interesting. So this question comes from Ryan Smith, and it says, by Richard Wesley's definition, wouldn't Birth of a Nation be a Black film? It blatantly tried to define race relations, including who Black people are. So let's talk about Birth of a Nation and the definition that we have, right? Let's deal with that question since somebody asked.
One of the reasons why Birth of a Nation is not a Black film and doesn't necessarily meet the definition that I laid down was that Birth of a Nation was based on a historical lie from beginning until end. And one of the best evidences or proof of that statement is the fact that almost instantly upon its release, Booker T. Washington and his, I'm sorry, not Booker T. Washington, but his executive secretary, who was sort of keeping things together in the wake of Booker T. Washington's death, went around the country raising money to make a film called Within Our Gates, which was a response to Birth of a Nation. And in fact, Dale Colston is on the Black Film Festival with me at the Newark Museum of the Arts. And several years ago, we showed or screened an excerpt from Within Our Gates to our audiences. And Turner Classic Movies has in fact run that film Within Our Gates. And when you see that film and you see the effort that was put into it, the point of view that dominated that film, you see how that film becomes not only a response to Birth of a Nation, but it can also be considered the first feature-length film by Black filmmakers in American cinematic history.
Mhm.
And that one is a Black film.
Thank you. Right. So by definition, a Black film is a Black film that accurately portrays who and what Black people are, historical conditions.
Yeah, you know, when you know, I would say, you know, and I would argue that a point of view and intent also become very important. Yes, you know, Black films inform Black people who we are, where we are, and what condition we are in. That was the definition that I gave. And that also is the definition of most Black authored plays in Black theater. That is the political point of view, as well as the cultural point of view of all Black creative artists, no matter what the art form is that they are employing. But when you have a film like Birth of a Nation, D.W. Griffith was not interested in informing Black people who we are, where we are, and what condition we are in. Birth of a Nation was a film that was designed from beginning to end to recreate the myth of the lost cause. That's the purpose of Birth of a Nation. Yes, there are Black people in it, but what are the Black people in that film doing? You know, and how were they portrayed? He put on screen an image of African-American people from the Reconstruction forward that perpetuated misinformation and some of the most racist propaganda that could be perpetrated against a group of people that permeated virtually every film that was made commercially in the United States from that day practically down to this one. And no, there's no way in the world that my definition of Black film can be applied to Birth of a Nation. No way, no how.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to so clearly respond to that question, because I think in so many areas, you know, what regardless whether it's education, whether it's the arts, whether it's science or music, right? Things are so often sort of co-opted and used in a way that's not the intended way. So I appreciate you taking the time to clarify for the audience the definition. And so we have another question here that is from Kai Campbell. Shout out to Kai. What role does avant-garde filmmaking play in the narrative? People, Sun Ra to the 80s, and then it begins to disappear.
Well, I mean, I guess, I don't know. I mean, the thing is that there's always going to be a space for nonlinear films. You know, could Brother from Another Planet be considered, you know, a avant-garde? I mean, it just depends. I mean, the thing is that that's more of a that's not just a Black cinema question as it is a mainstream cinema question in terms of there being space for independent films versus commercially you know, commercially funded or push films. I don't think that they go away. I think that now those films have more of an opportunity to, you know, because of the expansion, whether it's you know, streaming or even independently finding stuff on YouTube and other places, you know, to actually come out as opposed to the way it used to be before, where they would just kind of be small on the festival circuit. And then, you know, there'll be like you know, gems that were made a long time ago that finally see the light of day in a wide release, like you know, a movie that I watched over the break, Cane River, you know, which I thought was excellent. You know, it just really depends.
Yeah.
So thinking about the discussion that we've been having sort of about streaming, about the sort of the many different platforms that are available now, increased access, though not the access that we would want, right? That is the access that's necessary to fully be able to, I think part of what I heard you saying at the beginning is fully be able to control the entire production of the art. Where do you see, what do you see as the opportunities for Black film as we go forward, right? We think about Tyler Perry, we think about Oprah, we think about Ava, we think about Regina King, right? We think about all of these folks who are now in the mix in different kinds of ways, whose careers have evolved over time, ownership of studios, et cetera. What in your visionary mind would you see as the sort of the most in the next 10 years, where do you see the possibilities going, utilizing all of the avenues that we have, both to create the stories, but also to use Twitter, Netflix, Amazon, all of these things that are coming out to really capture the audience and our narrative in a way that propels Black film forward to your ideal?
Well, you're seeing it now. I mean, you're seeing it now on Netflix. You're seeing it now with Amazon. The movies that I would cite, for example, you know, the Ma Rainey, Small Axe, you know, those would be even you know, A Night in Miami. Those are all projects that, if they got made at all, would only have been regulated to this box of being, you know, television projects as opposed to being feature films. And I think the thing is that because of the, you know, the budgets, and because of the you know, the reach of Netflix and Amazon and the streamers, you know, these films now not only are being made fully realized in terms of how much money is going into making them. At the same time, you're also seeing, you know, the reach and the expansion, because a lot of people are seeing films that they might not have seen, you know, because of when theaters were open, you know, the way things are marketed, opening weekends. I mean, you're now getting a lot more eyeballs on films, and the traditional walls between cinematic release and streaming are now not only falling, you know, now disappearing. At the same time, it's you're seeing movies, I think, now have worldwide impact. Another movie that I think, you know, that I really loved and is one of my favorites of this year is The Five Bloods. You know, and that's another movie that might have been considered by a studio to be a niche film because the actors are older, because it's talking about a war that is now 50 years old. You know, they would say, is this really relevant to now? And Spike is like, no, it's completely relevant to what's happening right now. And this is why, this is how. And because it was one of, you know, with his prestige and him and his, you know, in his full capacity, it's a very much a Spike Lee joint. You know, at the same time, it's a Spike Lee joint that has such reach because everybody's seeing it. And no one has an excuse to not see it because it's coming right into your house. And so even catching up with it is different now, because even if you were the kind of person like myself who, when movie theaters were open, I was going every weekend, you know, there was always a film that kind of like fell between the cracks. That doesn't really happen anymore because now that everything is debuting at home as well as the few theaters that are open, I think that it gives you the opportunity from a filmmaking standpoint to have more people see your film. And I think in particular, because the streamers have so much money, you're now seeing different movies get made. And I think that helps the overall case of Black film, because now you really can tell expanded stories, and you can tell different stories that you might not have been able to do if selling popcorn was part of the criteria. But at the same time, I mean, I think it's important that people have the opportunity, and hopefully with the vaccines, hopefully with, you know, the eventual defeat of COVID, people will still want to see movies in theaters. But I'm not offended by the fact that films are coming out in this way, because I really think it's an opportunity. And I think it's an opportunity that Black filmmakers in particular are taking advantage of. And I think to huge benefit, honestly, because I think a lot of the movies that I mentioned are probably gonna, you know, do really well when it comes to Oscar nominations in a few months.
Richard, what do you see on the horizon?
I think basically that the horizon is limitless. And, you know, I'm speaking from the perspective of someone who began his career at a time when you could count the number of professional Black screenwriters who belong to the Writers Guild Union on the fingers of one hand. And the number of Black directors was even smaller than that. So to go from there to where we are now, you know, into a situation where, you know, we have, you know, young people coming up who are making, you know, first look deals with studios for sums of money that were not even considered possible, you know, just 10 years ago. Why would you put any kind of limitation on what's possible going forward? We have more young people coming out now who are not simply interested in coming into the business to be actors or directors or writers. That's unfortunate, I happen to feel, but okay, I'll live with it. But at the same time, these are people who are looking to go into the executive suites. And there are positions there that they are making possible for themselves because of the very conditions that Cheo has just outlined. So going forward, why not think in terms of limitless possibilities rather than you know, negotiating against ourselves by deciding that there are only a few possibilities. No, if you know, if you can use one of these to make a motion picture, then the only thing that's stopping you is the your own vision about what kind of story you want to tell. You
So
tell the story that you want to tell, and you pull the people together to make it happen.
So you mentioned, that there are less writers of color coming out. If you were to sort of envision, and this is me as the educator, a curious question here, what a pathway, right, from middle school to college that would begin to generate a sort of a cohort of young people interested in pursuing writing and the non-technical aspects of filmmaking? What would that look like for you?
Wow. Encouraging more students to get into courses that involve the expansion of their creative imaginations. So English courses, journalism courses, extracurricular activities after school that involve filmmaking, theater making, playwriting, anything that encourages their writing and gets them involved that way. Even gaming. How to develop algorithms for new games, how to write stories that will serve as the basis for those algorithms. Encourage young people to get into that and to move in those directions. Writing graphic novels and writing for companies that publish graphic novels. That's another way of training your visual eye, and from there moving into areas that involve screenwriting. Get around people who do those kinds of things. And now I'll shut up and let Cheo take over because he knows more about this than I do.
Well, no, the only thing I would add to it is reminding young people that they already are taking steps towards becoming filmmakers, whether they realize it or not, with the, I say the advent of TikTok, because whether it's something as, like the don't rush or the current phrase, the busted challenge, it's like what you're seeing are jump cuts, whether you realize it or not. If you're dressed one way and then as soon as the song hits and you flip the camera or you're turning the camera to do a cut. I mean, people go to film school to learn how to do stuff like that. Like you're already, and then if you get deep into like these TikTok wormholes, people are breaking all types of rules with wipes and with different ways of jumping time. And whether they realize it or not, they're making films. And you can take a lot of those techniques and then apply it to writing and expand it. And you are now, those skills will serve you into longer narrative. And I know it's silly, but because so many people do it, because they don't realize the power that they have, like my uncle said, in their hands. The cameras, like particularly when you get to the iPhone Pro, like 11s and 12s, like they're shooting native HD. They're shooting like, at a frame rate and with a quality that with a few other additive things, you could literally start directing films. And between, if you got to get a couple of iPhones and now you can download editing software, you can for $5,000 to $7,000 have more at your disposal than Spike Lee had when he made She's Gotta Have It. Or even, and that's the thing is I'm not saying, sometimes people go back and forth, how do you make a movie of that quality? No, you do have to write. You do have to, I think having a screenplay is incredibly important. And, you don't need anything but a legal pad for that, but at the same time, it's having people understand that the same expertise and passion and power that they would, for example, go through, in my case, my uncle's old records, and to understand sampling. And, you see a lot of people making records and how they just basically use what they have. And that is now hip hop is now like the world's most powerful cultural force that was all do it yourself. Technology has democratized filmmaking to the standpoint where they could put that same passion and now make films because it's within reach, and you might not be able to do it at the same level as that you're seeing in cinemas, but you can also make a short film, or you can make a film that you've done yourself, have some success with that, and get the opportunity to make a bigger film. Because whether it's El Mariachi, whether it's She's Gotta Have It, whether it's any number of independent films that were made on film and cost a lot of money, now with an iPhone, you can really make films that at the very least could match those aesthetics.
So given all of that, I have a question from an EJ Josie, just thinking of the advice that you just sort of put out there for the young people. This question is, what advice do you have for filmmakers of color? And how does all of that kind of factor into somebody right now who's trying to figure out how to enter, where to enter, what platform to utilize, where they should be? Should they be behind the camera? Should they be in front of the camera? Like, what is your advice to those folks trying to get into film now?
Right. That's the main thing. It's like the reason I say right is because if you can't, if the frustration of writing dissuades you from making a film, you didn't really want to do it in the first place. And so sometimes that's a good barrier. Like you might, in trying to write a film, you might realize that it's frustrating and mind-numbing and a waste of time. I'm not saying that to discourage anybody, but it's just like it's kind of like boxing. I mean, they're only but so many moves. They're only but so many bobs and weaves, and ultimately what's going to come down is, do you really want to run 5 miles a day? Do you really want to lift weights and get hit in the face? Because after that, it's going to be put into what you put into it is going to be some of that input. And so the thing is that as long as you have paper and a writing instrument, you can now, because of all the things at your fingertips in terms of the internet, you can download screenplays. You can watch movies with said screenplay and start to kind of teach yourself the form and break it down in small pieces. And I'm not saying it like anybody can do it, just like I'm not saying that you could teach yourself how to box from YouTube. But what I'm saying is that that's the most important thing is like it's writing, it's playing around with any kind of camera you can find, even if it's only your cell phone's camera, and just teaching yourself pieces. And then as you learn more, you start thinking about, okay, like, what else do I want to do with this? Do I have this kind of passion? Can I convince my friends, or do I have friends that are, that are into some of the same things that I'm into, and kind of going from there. I want to tell you that that there's a special formula, or that there's more to it. I really do, but there isn't. I mean, because after a point, everybody else, no matter what level of success, it's all a crapshoot. It's really a lot about passion and determination. I find, and it's still, even after you have success, it's still just as hard, in a different way. No matter how many fancy computer screens I have, no matter how many different things I write with, I'm still ultimately now coming back to writing by hand. And it's really kind of become the purest form of do I still want to do this? And am I doing this? And then doing it.
Back in the, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Rich. What were you gonna say?
I was going to say, back in the day, because I started out in the theater. I didn't start in the movie business. But, at the beginning of the Black Arts Movement, when we wanted to make theater, we just made theater. I remember, I could write like a 10-minute play. I knew some actors in New York who knew a place where they could where we could put the play up. And that's what we did, so I wrote the play. There was someone who could direct it, and we had friends who could act in it. And when we didn't have a place, Amiri Baraka had already by that time taught us that we could use street corners if we had to. And, you know, so extrapolate that over into film. Okay. You have a 10-minute, you have a script that may have a story that only takes 10 minutes to tell. Do you know some people who want to act? Do you know some people who want to, stand by and hold the camera while you work out how the action is going to look in film, look on film rather? Because what I just described to you is what the very first filmmakers did over 100 years ago. That's how all this got started. You know, you don't need a whole lot of money. You don't need a whole lot of equipment. What you do need is your imagination and some people who are willing to be on the same page as you. And do what Cheo just described. You know, make that short film, run it back, see how it looks. And now with all this, with all this electronic media out here, the social media, you can upload it and you get an audience almost, you can get 100 people, just your family and friends. And that's a start. Once you have a start, once you know that what you write can affect the minds of people who see it, that is an act of confidence. That gives you the confidence to do it again, slightly better this time. And you just keep doing it and doing it and doing it and getting better at it. Keep growing an audience, keep growing a reputation for yourself. And who knows what grows out of that? At a certain point, you can call yourself an artist.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And the thing that's interesting is that, the fear never goes away. It's, you think it's gonna get easier with success. You think it's, and it's not that it gets easier. It's just that it's like jumping. If you're a swimmer, like if you jump into a pool, it's always going to be cold for the first 5 seconds. There's just no way around it. It's just like you just got to just get past that. One of my favorite, because I'm a geek. One of my favorite moments in all the X-Men movies is the very first X-Men movie where Wolverine is about to pop his claws, and Rogue asks him in the movie, does it hurt? And he says, every single time. And that's what I always think about with writing, is that the fear, the self-loathing, the tension never goes away. You just have to just write and write badly until it's not as bad anymore. You have no more tougher critic than yourself. And sometimes the best way to learn dialogue is to write bad dialogue, have friends act it out, and then you understand why it's bad. Yeah. And then from there you begin to refine, and you begin to learn. And then even after you're writing, and this is something I can tell you from a professional standpoint, is that for me, not having written plays, I was able to write well on the page for a long time, but then it wasn't until getting into television and getting things made that I really learned how to write dialogue. And I was lucky enough to learn at the feet of people like Regina King and Michael Cudlitz and, C. Thomas Howell and Lucy Liu and, Ben McKenzie and the stars of, and Mike, Michael Cudlitz and all the stars of Southland, because those table reads, seeing how the actors adjusted my lines, got rid of lines, changed lines, Sean Hattasey, I learned how to write dialogue. And so working on Southland and doing that, ultimately prepared me for when I was working with, Mike Coulter, Simone Mistick, Mahershala Ali and Alfre Woodard, and Rob Morgan, on Luke Cage. And so that's the thing, is that every experience teaches you something else, but it all starts with just trying to write something and then just having members of your family read it out. And you'll see very quickly whether or not it works or not, and then just trying to make it better. And then each time you do it, it just gets easier.
So write through the fear of writing and get critiqued through the fear of getting critiqued. and just
Yeah.
keep pushing. And then that will eventually let you know, to your original point, if the writing is the barrier, then maybe there are other ways that you can be in the industry without actually having to be that person that's producing the screenplay or the script, which is
Well, and then also just putting the energy that you put into hustling the script into actually writing it.
Mhm.
You know, because all the time you're like, yeah, yo, I got this idea, you know, like you know, like just put that energy into actually writing it. And you know, because what happens all the time is like, you know, you just go around pitching the same idea to people, hoping that they're going to take time to put their energy into your dream.
Mm.
You know, as opposed to owning your dream in the first place, because you can never expect anybody to you know, to that's what you're asking somebody to do when you're saying I got this great idea, is you're asking them to, you know, put their energy into your dream, as opposed to you putting the energy into your dream and then coming at them in a different way. You know, I think that's really the most important thing, you know.
Yeah, man, true that.
So just thinking about the writing process, and Luke Cage, I was late to the game, but I am a fan, and I'm a fan for so many reasons. One, that it's relevant, it's contemporary, but like the historical knowledge that's dropped throughout Luke Cage is real, right? And so the writing requires a level of studying, right? It requires a level of development and knowledge building in order, just going back to this conversation that we've been having about what defines a Black film, right? The intent and all of those pieces of it, you have to have the historical background to be able to produce something that's going to live up to the definition that we've been talking about tonight. So I would like to hear you both talk about, Richard, obviously you've lived through a phase that, you know, I miss MLK, right? Like I miss Malcolm X, like I miss having had the opportunity to actually hear them, not through a recording, but hear them because they were here. And Cheo and I did not have that. And so the level of study that in his field and my field we have to do to bring the history to the work that we do is pretty significant. So if you could talk about the importance of both the work that you do to ensure the historical accuracy and fidelity of the work, but also the significance of the movements that we've been through to your work and to Black film overall. That was a long question. I know.
Yeah, it is. You know,
So I
well,
mean,
in a contemporary, you know, in contemporary fashion, I mean, I think some of the answer you might find in the book that I did write. I wrote this book called "It's Always Loud in the Balcony," which is really, it's sort of like a historical memoir, I guess, if I can use.
Do you actually have a copy of the book that you actually hold up into the frame to show people?
Not in front of me. I'd have to get up and go and find it, and
I'll go find it. Give me one second.
But in that book, I basically talk about you know, those growing up years for me, are coming into consciousness during the height of the civil rights movement in the 60s when I was at Howard, and those first years when I was, a young acolyte in the Black arts movement. And in my work, whether it was writing plays for, on stage, or whether it was writing in film and television, I tried to keep the memory, those memories and experiences that I had alive, either in the characters or place it somewhere in the dialogue, put it somewhere in the script. And also it would turn up in the choices of work that I did do. when I was writing a series of TV movies for Showtime, Deacons for Defense, which was about a group of, it was based on a true story. It was about a group of brothers in Louisiana and Mississippi who called themselves the Deacons for Defense. And they were sort of a security group that stood between many of the civil rights workers and the Ku Klux Klan. They were armed, and there was an armed confrontation between them and the Klan in Louisiana. And that was the basis of the story that I wrote. I thought about some of my own experiences in the civil rights era when I wrote the screenplay for Mandela and de Klerk for Showtime, which was about the negotiations for the end of apartheid in South Africa. And that took me to South Africa, where I saw echoes of the civil rights movement there in the conversations that I was having with people and with some of the memorials and exhibits that were on display in those first years after Nelson Mandela had been elected to the presidency of the new South Africa. So for me, it's making sure somehow, some way, my experiences show up in the scripts, that I'm writing, in the plays that I'm writing, and that's how I keep, that's how I keep all of that alive, and it gives me the energy that I need in terms of the writing that I have to do.
Well,
So
and
I have
that's
the book on Amazon. Do you want me to share the screen so people can see it? I pulled it up. Were you able to?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Either that or to put the link in the Facebook link, I think would be cool. What I would add to what Rich has said is that growing up, like the same way that you see all those books behind him, like if you had a similar view of my house, it's like I grew up surrounded by books. And the thing about talking with my uncle is that he made history, like Black history was alive for me. Just, whether it was having, if you talk to like just sitting and watching documentaries and movies with him and looking at the books and understanding, the various movements, and then understanding how to apply research to building worlds, I think is really important. And because I read as much as I do, but the trick is to not think of it with the way that I used to as a journalist, which is, it's one thing to write a nonfiction book, it's another thing to write an article, but like when you're actually trying to use, historical research to make a world alive, in that translation, a lot of what it is, it's looking at the facts from an emotional standpoint. And then when you do that, and you basically are able to put characters in a scenario that's informed by history, but at the same time, you have to invent moments that can symbolize like things that you might not be able to scrunch in this limited time period you have in a film. A lot of it is, if you don't understand the actual history of what happened, it makes it hard to make it up, because then you might end up going places that you either will be later contradicted by, or at the same time might not necessarily need, take you to the places that you're trying to go and symbolize in a life visually. Film and television are different mediums. Like I always say that a film is best at telling a story, whereas television, because of the amount of episodes and hours you have, is better at telling a longer story. And so, and it's also just the format of storytelling alone is different. Like a screenplay ultimately is I think it's like haiku. It's got a very set structure, but there's limitless ways of telling a story within that set structure. And so, and when you're trying to do a biopic, you're trying to find a moment or a sliver of somebody's life that symbolizes the entire story. And so there's parts of that. And so, for example, where the history, even in a fictional thing like Luke Cage, like the reason that there's so much Harlem history, the reason there's so much hip hop history, the reason there's so much, so many different like literary Easter eggs is that I realized pretty quickly the difference between being a film or a conventional television series versus Netflix is that so many people on Netflix watch the show on their computers. And so if you've got this moment or you drop a name that they might not have heard of, someone can pause and literally Google the reference, and then all of a sudden it pops up, and then they can unpause. So I looked at the entire series as like really a living, breathing hyperlink, because there are all these different moments that someone, if they don't understand something, they can Google it, and then all of a sudden they've got a deeper understanding of it. So even if you have a moment in Cottonmouth's office in episode 6, where he's talking about how not actually, that was episode 5, and in episode 5 of season 1 of Luke Cage, where he's talking about Percy Sutton. If you never heard of Percy Sutton, you can Google it, and then you understand who Percy Sutton was. They're all it's those kinds of things that are sprinkled throughout, both seasons of Luke Cage that I think people that are fans of Black history, dig about the show is the fact that there's always a lot more going on than on the surface.
So how do you gentlemen see today's movements, Black Lives Matter, Me Too, affecting the direction of film, but also the relationship of filmmakers to the industry?
Kicking down doors, saying that the injustices of the past, are no longer should exist. It's a constant struggle. But the thing is Black Lives Matter isn't new, because Zora Neale Hurston, Duke Ellington, anybody, Ralph Ellison, and anybody who's ever tried to capture our experience in any medium, as ultimately the ultimate goal was to prove that our lives mean something inside of a culture and a narrative that is continuously trying to erase our contributions, our worth, and our knowledge and who we are. So it's just that phrase is basically encompassing 150 to 200 years worth of movement in that direction. It's now a phrase and a hashtag that the weight of that is pushing everything forward, so to speak. So it's not new. Me Too, yes, the phrase is new, but these are struggles, these are injustices that have been fought for a long time that are now no longer in the shadows and are now no longer going to be tolerated. And the ripple effect of both, it's incredibly changing the overall culture of Hollywood. So it's not just Me Too, it's not just Black Lives Matter. All of a sudden, you are finally in a Hollywood where, so for example, like, I don't know if you heard recently about what happened. It was in Vanity Fair. The showrunner of Magnum PI, Peter Linkoff, who was one of the more powerful showrunners in Hollywood, gets fired by CBS. And it wasn't because he was racist, and it wasn't because he was sexist, although those things were issues or problems, particularly the sexism part. It was because he was an asshole. And this is the first time in the history of Hollywood that being a jerk and being verbally abusive and psychologically abusive is now criteria to get you removed from your job. But that also has to do with the fact that because racism isn't going to be tolerated in the same way, and because the sexual violence that was happening behind the scenes is no longer going to be tolerated, it's now justice in general is going to be is now important to everybody. And it's the kind of thing that hopefully is not being, pushed under the rug to a certain extent. It's not saying that things are better, but saying that at the very least, things are beginning to move in the right direction and will begin to gain force.
W.B. Du Bois had famously said that the color line would be one of the defining social and political flashpoints of the 20th century. But the social and political flashpoint of the 21st century is going to be the redefinition of who and what an American is, and how that history is going to be written, and who is going to be involved in the writing of that history, the changing of the point of view of that history. And that brings it down to artists and how we interpret our reality in this space, and who gets to be the gatekeepers of that interpretation. And so every time there's a person of color who acquires a position, whether it's a showrunner of a television show, whether it's a network or studio executive, those definitions and perceptions are gradually changed. Going back to your question, in that sense, the same way the civil rights movement informed the art of my youth, the Black Lives Matter is informing the art of today's youth. And those definitions and the art that comes out of it is going to in turn inform the way in which, or the images that are going to prevail from the middle of this century onward, onto the end and into the next century.
Well, I have learned a tremendous amount from you gentlemen this evening. As I said when we were backstage, from MLK till now is my whole entire life, and so it's there's just I when I was preparing, I actually sat down and started to do sort of like a film chronology of films that came out from 1972 to the present, just to kind of get my own sort of arc of my relationship with Black film, so to speak. And so my last question to you all on that note is, what are the 3 films that you watch over and over and over again?
Aside from Godfather?
Yeah, true.
3 Black films that you watch over. My mother watches Godfather as much as she possibly can too, but over and over and over again.
3.
Yeah.
Or as many, curious about you.
Nothing But a Man is one. Another one that I'd have to say, Always Outnumbered, Always Outgunned, a adaptation of a Walter Mosley novelette. And it was produced on, I think it was produced on HBO back in the 90s. I don't get to see it enough.
Yeah, no, I mean,
the third one it's kind of hard because there's so many to choose from. But I think the third one probably, it just might be Spike Lee's 4 Little Girls, the documentary.
For me, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay, my battery's going. Malcolm X. I would say to a certain extent, Deep Cover is another one I like. And I'm trying to think of another. I mean, because the thing is that I watch films on a daily basis, and the thing is that I watch different films for different reasons. You know, sometimes for performance, sometimes for camera angles, sometimes for editing pace. It just really depends. Another one that I come back to occasionally, you know, it's hard to say. I
Which
mean,
one when
it's
you're just gonna chill out and for no, you know, this is a film this is a film you go to when you just need to pull back and probably you're not ever not in creative mode, but there's just one of those, this is my chill film. And you just watch.
I don't, to be perfectly honest, I don't really have one. I mean, because I've got movies that I put on in the background when I'm writing, but the rule for that is that it's not a movie that I haven't seen. Because if I haven't seen it, I'll watch it. If I've seen it a million times, then I'm just writing. Just, you know, Do the Right Thing, I think is one of those films. But that's not a chill film. It's chill until it isn't. You know, you know, there are any number of films. You know, it's funny. I constantly watch my friend John Singleton's films. You know, whether it's Boys in the Hood, whether it's Higher Learning, whether it's Rosewood, whether it's Baby Boy, but I haven't had the courage yet to listen to them with director's commentary, because I think that would be too emotional for me, because then it would be like all the experiences I had just sitting with John and watching movies, and you know, it would be like he was alive all over again, and then I would remind myself of the fact that he's gone. You know, I haven't done that yet, but at some point I will. But you know, particularly as once I start moving towards directing, I know that John and I will have that conversation. But that's the thing. I mean, you know, it's like the experience of I really kind of like think about it, because he was somebody that just has such a palpable love of film, that, and it's such an enthusiasm for film, that it's you know, other than my uncle, you know, is the one influence on me that is constantly just reminding myself of, like, you know, what do you love about this scene? If you don't love this, why are you writing it? You know, because that was the way that he attacked film, you know, every single day. You know, whether, because as much as passionate as he was about directing, he was also just as passionate about filmmaking, and it all came from a certain place. And it's something that I remind myself of, you know, no matter how jaded I get, no matter how tired I am, I just remind myself that, you know, I'm fortunate to be doing this, and then I get excited all over again.
Well, thank you for sharing that and for speaking his name into this conversation this evening. Again, thank you. I just, it was an honor to share this space with you guys. This is not my space. And I just, you know, I just feel like I had a chance that is a once in a lifetime chance to hear and to learn some things from some very, very monumental people who are really, you know, putting your life's work into documenting our reality in ways that matter to us. And so I thank you for sharing your time with me this evening. And I thank you for joining the library. And I'm going to pass it back over to Jocelyn.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.
Lauren, thank you very much, Lauren. It was great.
Thank you. This was fun.
Great. I feel like I'm the mean principal that my face appeared in the room. So I hate to end the conversation.
But you do kind of look like the lady from Harry Potter. With the pink sweater and the pearl.
Exactly. I'm like, I always have to be the mean parent in the situation. But thank you so much. I really enjoyed that. I don't know, Dale and Reggie, I definitely got some library ideas out of this, you know, in terms of getting back to writing and screenplays and the kind of things we want to do with technology going forward. So we get our next filmmakers, you know, maybe in Newark, who knows? So I just want to say thank you all for attending our Martin Luther King Jr. commemorative lecture, with special thanks to our esteemed panelists, again, Richard Wesley and Cheo Hodari Coker. Cheo, yes. And to our moderator, again, Lauren Wells, our board president. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
His name means strong man of distinction, and now you know why.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you, Rich.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you also to Enrico Delia Corna, and to PNC Bank. This discussion has given us a lot to think about and to watch and rewatch and celebrate in terms of our favorite films and the ones we need to catch up on and check out as well. If anyone missed this or they want to watch it again, it will be available online at npl.org. Just check our page for that in the coming days. Tonight's panel discussion, I just have a little library commercial. It was part of our official kickoff for the library's Black History Celebration. This year, our theme is the art and beauty of Black power, cinema, dance, music, in which we'll explore the ways African Americans have used pop culture to share stories of liberation with each other and the world through a series of streaming talks, interviews, and performers. We also have the historical virtual exhibition going on, Black Power, 19th century Newark's first African-American rebellion, and that was going to debut on February 1st. Our Noelle Lorraine Williams is the guest curator, so we look forward to that, Noelle. Also on Saturday, February 6th, we are excited to host Belleville native Lonnie Bunch III, who was the 14th secretary of the Smithsonian Institution and previously the first director, of course, of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Renowned artist Savion Glover will also be featured as part of the celebration. So we'll keep you posted on the details. And just to get more details, please again visit npl.org and our social media feeds for more information on the other events we've scheduled. Good night, everyone. Please be well. We look forward to seeing you in the library. We are open tomorrow again, and we are ready to meet our community's needs. So good night and thank you to all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.